freedom is a negative thing, not a positive thing, which is to say, it's not about what we do, but what we don't do. So, of course, we see this in the exact opposite way. We see freedom as a positive thing. We see freedom as that I'm free to do X, or free to do Y, or free to do whatever I want to do, free to obtain my goals. And we find it extraordinarily hard to see that that isn't freedom at all. We find it extraordinarily hard to see that that is actually a state of bondage or slavery. It's a state of bondage or slavery to our thinking or to our goals, which is our thinking. Now, this doesn't make any sense to us at all, because I would see my goal as being my own thing. I make my goal. I'm in charge. I'm in charge of the goal. I say it should be there. And therefore, me being able to obtain what it is that I actually want to obtain is, as far as I'm concerned, the very epitome of freedom. And that's what we all see as freedom. Now, in one way, it could be said that this is a kind of philosophical discussion, and it's okay if you happen to like philosophical discussions, because then you can get into it one way or the other. You can take one side or the other side. But we all kind of know that philosophy, it doesn't really matter, or we think it doesn't really matter. And so for most of us, this debate about whether freedom is a positive or negative phenomenon is sublimely irrelevant to the nitty-gritty of our lives. Or so we think. Because when it comes to mental health, we really do need to get this straight and see what freedom is and what it isn't. Because if we don't, we're going to be barking up the wrong tree. And so, when we suffer as a result of not having enough freedom, and all neurotic mental suffering is suffering because we don't have enough freedom, then by misunderstanding freedom, we're going to embark on the wrong road. We're going to go down the wrong road, and we're going to make things worse and not better, because we've failed to grasp this most salient of points, that freedom is negative, that it is to be found in the not doing rather than the doing. So in other words, what I'm saying is, we might like to dismiss this as mere philosophizing, but it's really the most vital thing we could ever know. And if we don't know it, that isn't to say we'll miss it and we'll suffer from not knowing it, because we can quite easily live life in a back-to-front way without ever really being aware of it, or being aware of the disadvantages that come from getting everything backwards. But if we ever do suffer from mental health difficulties, then it really becomes not just very helpful, it becomes crucially helpful to understand what freedom is. So from a psychological point of view, this can be understood in terms of being trapped by our own construct. So I think I'm free to make goals, and then the next further step of my freedom is to attain these goals. But practical observation shows that freedom is really the wrong word to use here, because if I set my heart on doing something, I experience motivation, which we see as a good thing. But it's a peculiar type of motivation, because it's more like a need. It's a coercion. I've got to succeed. I've got to succeed, is what I feel. What that means is, if I don't succeed, it's really bad. And if I don't succeed, I'm going to feel an awful lot of negative stuff. Disappointment, despondency, dismay, despair. You name it. I'm going to be down in the dumps in a big way. So what we're really talking about here, if we could focus on it, is the carrot and the stick. If I can obey the dictates of my mind and obtain the goal, then that'll be great. I'll feel good, I'll feel empowered, I'll feel like I've got brownie points. And so I'm striving for that good feeling, the euphoria feeling. And if I fail, the reverse applies, and I'll feel really bad. I'm going to get lashed. So instead of feeling good about myself, I'm going to be recriminating against myself and feeling bad. And so that's the stick. So this motivation that we see as being so good, it's coercion. If you're a good boy, you get the goodies. If you're a bad boy, you get a kick up the arse. So that isn't free motivation. It's pure slavery, pure compulsion. And we can see this every time that we do have an idea of something that we want and it doesn't come to pass. We're going to be disappointed, but more than this, we're going to be gutted. We're going to actually take this on board and feel like a failure, feel like a loser if it keeps on happening, that I can never get to happen what I want to happen. That will totally undermine my sense of myself. And I really will go around with a big loser sign over my head. But all that means really is that I haven't been a successful slave. A successful slave does what they're coerced to do, and they get a pat on the head. Well, sometimes they do anyway. When the thinking mind really puts the squeeze on us, it tells us to do all sorts of things. And then when we do them, we don't get any feeling of relief or satisfaction. I'm talking about the extremes of OCD here, really. We just automatically have to do another thing. And so it's like having a bad employer who doesn't show any appreciation to you for the work you've done. If you finish quickly, they'll just give you another job quicker. So that's the situation that we're stuck in with the thinking mind. The thinking mind very quickly slips into this thing of being a bad boss. And another trait of the bad boss is, even when we do the job, it's never good enough. We could have done this, or we could have done that, or we went around it the wrong way, or it took too long. So there is this other element of constant criticism, constant carping. And then if we really can't do it, then that criticism turns into damnation. We're damned to hell. So that's a bad boss, and the thinking mind can, as I've said, can very easily slip into that mode. And most of us can probably relate to that. Almost all of us can relate to that. This idea of being critical of ourselves, self-criticism, not being good enough. So the whole thing about being good enough is that this comes out of a lack of freedom, because we have to be good, we have to be this, we have to be that. And it doesn't take too much to see that the whole system is based on have-tos. And no good ever comes out of them, because have to is a lack of freedom. And even if we successfully do what we have to do or ought to do or should do, that doesn't produce freedom as a byproduct. We don't get free when we successfully obey the compulsions that are operating on us. That would be a crazy idea. So if I am able to do what the bully wants me to do, is that going to translate into freedom? There might be a kind of a fantasy that it will, that, oh, well, the bully will turn around and say, fair enough, off you go. You're a good lad, really. But that is it's a fantasy which doesn't stand any scrutiny, because bullies don't do that. Give them an inch and they take a mile. Give them a mile and they take several light years. That's how it works. That's how a bully works. That's how the thinking mind, when it gets to be in that position of dominance over us, that's what it does. It reveals itself to be a malign force. It's virtually impossible to please it. And even if we do please it, it's only a small little pat on the back or pat on the shoulder, and then it's the next job and the next job. And we're always given this promise of some final fulfillment just round the corner, as Ellen Watts says. And that's a con job. That's a trick, because the mind, once it gets a grip on you, it'll never let you go. And if it's got a grip on you, that's another way of saying that there's no freedom. You've got no freedom. So by submitting to the state of no freedom in the hope that eventually, if we submit thoroughly enough, we will become free, is clearly a fantasy that doesn't bear too much scrutiny. So we can look at our everyday life in terms of lots of little urges and compulsions coming along. A steady stream of little impulses. And we're not aware of this way of looking at things because we're so trained to act on these impulses that we don't see them as external coercive factors. We don't see them as compulsions. The impulse comes along and we obey it. Oh, I think I'll do this, or I think I'll say that. And it's so seamless and so habitual that we have the illusion that it's us that want to do it. Therefore, we have the illusion that this is my autonomy, so that I'm going around being autonomous, doing what I really want to do. That's because we have become so identified with the slave driver that we think what he wants for us to do is what we want to do. And we've lost ourselves so totally that we think we're autonomous, which is a bizarre state of affairs. That when we actually have zero autonomy, we interpret as meaning this, that we are perfectly autonomous or perfectly free. Or we could say that when we're completely psychologically unconscious, we'll swear blind on whatever you want, that we are conscious, which is what Gurdjieff says. It's no good telling people that they're not conscious. There's a dubious benefit in doing that. So once we look into the life of the everyday life of all of us, if we were to look into it, we see there's all these impulses, all these little coercions, and we hop to it. And when we are, for the most part, able to successfully do whatever the impulses are impelling us to do, then all's fine and dandy, and we don't need to see that we're actually slaves. We won't see that we're slaves, and we don't want to see it, but we don't have to see it because there's no evidence. We're such successful slaves that we think we're free. But there's a way to test this out, and the way to test it out is simply to try what it feels like not to do the things that the impulses are telling us to do. So what we're doing is we're testing a little we're testing out our ability to not do. So, how good am I at not doing? Am I quite good? Very good? Not good at all? This is a very practical experiment. All we need to do is just sit down for a decent length of time, maybe 20 minutes, and then notice the impulses coming. And we will notice them if we resolve to sit somewhere in a chair and do nothing and just notice all the little itches that come along, all the little compulsions, all the little desires. So if I come into the house, I've been out somewhere doing something, and instead of doing the kind of stuff that I normally do, instead of slipping into the kind of routines that I always slip into, I just sit in a chair and just stay there and just do nothing. Now that's an odd thing because we don't usually do it, unless we happen to be a Taoist sage or Buddhist master or something. We don't usually do a lot of not doing. And that's not doing isn't to be confused with sitting in front of the TV or looking at an iPad, or that's self-distraction. That's a doing. Not doing means that you're not involved in any distraction at all, and that when a thought comes along, you don't do what the thought wants you to do. So if I'm sitting down, I come into the house and I'm sitting down, before very long, all the little pinpricks are going to come along, little impulses for me to do the things that I normally do. And quite often, within a short space of time, these impulses are so strong that I just get up and do them anyway. So definitely people will say, well, I tried it, but I just felt so stupid sitting there that I had to do something. I just felt ridiculous. I remember one lady saying that her neighbours might look through the window and catch her doing nothing, and then that'll be the talk of the town. It'll be major scandal. But it's the same for all of us. We feel vaguely foolish and uncomfortable. It's not a familiar space. And so we're quite likely to give up the whole exercise and think, oh, this is stupid, or something of that nature. And when that happens, it's because the bully of the thinking mind, the coercive mechanical factor, which is operating on us our whole lives, has kicked our ass, and we're not able to do nothing. On the other hand, it's perfectly possible that we will be able to sit there, and if we are, we will notice impulse after impulse, thought after thought, and our mind will jump from here to there. Our mind won't be happy to sit still. And what this shows, this little exercise, it shows that normal life is a matter of obeying the impulses. Now, if I do this exercise and I'm sitting there peaceful as you like and it's fine, that means I'm able to not do, and that means I'm not a slave. And it means that if I do something, just because I'm not a slave doesn't mean I'm going to be totally passive and I'm not going to be able to live my life. It just means that I can live my life because it's a genuine volition, and I'm not being controlled by my mind in a mechanical way to do it. So there is this kind of thing that we tend to say, and that's, well, if I get rid of this type of motivation, the carrot and stick motivation, the coercive motivation, the kick up the arse motivation, I'll never do anything. I'll be a slob. I'll be a loser. I won't get out there and do the stuff. So when we look at this a bit closer, it's kind of ridiculous to assume that unless I'm coerced every step of the way, my life's going to be nothing and I'm just going to sit on the carpet passively gazing at my own navel or whatever it is. The idea is, unless I'm controlled by the extrinsic motivation of my mind, then I'll do nothing, which is kind of assuming that the way we are in ourselves has not got any motivation of its own, has not got any opportunity or motivation to live life, that we have to be enslaved to live life, even though we wouldn't say it like that. And of course this isn't true at all. If we look at small children, we can see that they don't tell themselves to do things, and they don't do things out of a sense of duty or habit. They haven't lived it long enough to get trapped in habit or routines. And yet they do all sorts of stuff. They do all sorts of stuff because it spontaneously comes to them to do it. So in other words, the inner type of motivation, intrinsic motivation, works. Motivation which isn't like applying to the Council for Housing planning permission or something like that, where we have to refer everything to the thinking mind and get its rubber stamp. The thinking mind has nothing to do with that. The thinking mind has nothing to do with our motivation for living life. It comes in when we need it. Like if there's something we have to work out, we work it out. But the thinking mind isn't the central authority that we have to go through for every single thing. So that's definitely a lie, that if we aren't enslaved by our own thoughts and our own constructs and our own goals, which we have to fulfill because we'll feel bad if we don't. So it's a lie that is the necessary system. It's necessary for nothing apart from frustration and misery, really. Because even when we do all the things, we're doing it out of routine, out of habit. It's like what Colin Wilson calls the inner robot is doing it for us. So that's great. But it's not me that's living my life, then it's the robot. But that is kind of a hypothetical point, really, because if I am living my life as a robot and I am able to be successfully obeying the impulses, either conditioning or the programming, then I'll never be aware of any problem, really. That'll just be it, and I'll assume that is life. But what happens in neurotic mental illness is that the extrinsic motivation, the thinking mind, increases its grip on us, tighter and tighter and tighter. And it's telling us to do things that are impossible to do. So it's not only constantly setting us tasks, it's setting us tasks that are more and more ridiculous, more and more impossible. And because we can't obey them, we then become aware of them, even though we're still trying to do them or enact the impulses. So really, we're hopping around the place and we're really not having a good time. And we're becoming aware of the lack of freedom. It's like wearing a shoe that's far too tight and we're getting blisters and we know it's far too tight because it's hurting us. So that's the revelatory or insightful part of neurosis. We're learning what our true situation is, slaves. We didn't know it before because we were successful slaves. Now we're unsuccessful and we get to know about it because we're being punished by the central authority and the thinking mind. And not only is this central authority sticking us the whole time with its goad, trying to get us to do stuff, it's slating us down to the ground for not being able to. And that's a very familiar situation for anyone who has experienced chronic mental suffering, that we've all experienced that a little bit, but we forget about it again. We forget that we're slaves, in other words. So then we can set goals to do this, and we can try and use the mind to free us from our neurosis, which is caused by the mind. Or we can discover what freedom really means, which has got nothing to do with goals, and it's got nothing to do with doing things. It's got everything to do with not doing things. Okay, thanks for watching.